Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bianca Gonzalez, and I am the Bullying Prevention Program Coordinator at Charitable Foundation. This is our final session of day 3 within our virtual bullying prevention conference. If you are watching us again and you've already been watching our previous webinars, welcome back. And for those of you that are new, this is going to be new information for you, and those of you that have been watching our webinars, I'm going to go ahead and run through the same info that I have been doing, but just a couple of new features that we have during our webinar today is our closed captioning service. So it's super simple to use. If you go ahead and just look down at your screen, there is a CC icon. If you click on that arrow pointing up, it'll show subtitles, and that's how you turn on that feature. It's the same steps to turn it off, so it's fairly easy to use. And then we are recording our webinar today, and it will be uploaded on our YouTube channel within 24 to 48 hours. If you want to subscribe to our page, it's Riverside Medical Clinic Charitable Foundation, so you can stay updated on the videos as we post them. We're also providing a kindness kit giveaway, and as you can see, our grand prize is kindness kits for a classroom. And then we have a couple of other attendee prizes, which consist of Amazon gift cards. If you're not an educator, and let's say you do win our grand prize, you can actually donate a kit to your classroom of choice. And please keep in mind that this giveaway is available to all Riverside County attendees only. So another thing that we do have within this webinar is our chat box feature and our Q&A feature. And I can see already that everybody's pretty aware with our chat box feature, so that's great. After each of our sessions, we're also going to provide an opportunity to complete a short survey, and we look forward to receiving your valuable feedback. And also by completing that survey, it is an additional entry within our kindness kit giveaway. We're also very appreciative of the help of our wonderful sponsors that have helped us facilitate this week-long event, and I want to go ahead and shout them out. So we want to go ahead and thank Riverside Medical Clinic, Kaiser Permanente, the Press Enterprise, City of Riverside, Riverside County Board of Supervisors, Hub International, IEHP, Alliant, Singer Luwak, Union Bank, and LabCorp. We truly, truly thank you for your support. So now I want to share a little bit about our foundation. And in this slide, you can see that it shows the impact that we had in 2019, but I also do want to share what we've currently been doing during this time. So about 36 years ago in 1984, 19 RMC physicians actually formed our foundation with the goal of improving the health and quality of life in inland Southern California through advocacy, individual and professional education, and service. We offer monthly support groups for endometriosis, prostate cancer, Alzheimer's, and brain injury and stroke. And although we're not meeting in person, they are meeting online. They're receiving wellness check calls, and we have been mailing monthly newsletters with vital support information. Our scholarship program to date has awarded over $25,000 in 3 different areas related to health education and special need programs. And in 2012, we held a lecture on bullying that inspired us to launch the Anti-Bullying Institute, also known as ABI. This bullying prevention program offers services and resources to parents, administrators, and children in Spanish and English to assist in ending the cycle of bullying. ABI has impacted over 14,000 students and parents through student and parent-centered bullying prevention education, and we also currently serve over 20,000 Hero alumni through our ongoing programs. The Traveling Triplets programming is a dog therapy program, which brings meaning and purpose for someone who is living with dementia, and this program is currently on hold, but we hope to return to a normal schedule as soon as it is safe for our seniors. And lastly, we have reached thousands through our health, education, and events in honor of some of our founding doctors. So with that being said, I now want to go ahead and introduce our presenter for today, Gustavo Hurtado Jr. And he is actually he has 10 years of experience in youth organizing, grassroots project management, and LGBTQ+ mental health in San Bernardino and Riverside counties. They worked as the mental health education and outreach coordinator for the Rainbow Pride Youth Alliance for 4 years and is the lead facilitator for their source group. Gustavo grew up in the Inland Empire and has 2 degrees from the University of California Riverside, a BA in Anthropology and a BA of Biology. Gustavo is a gender non-binary pansexual and a taco lover. They use mixed pronouns, he, she, and they, and is Latinx. I will now go ahead and give it away to Gustavo.
All right. All right, hey folks, how y'all doing? I'm gonna get the PowerPoint up, and I thank everyone for being here. Thank you, Bianca, for that lovely introduction. I'm gonna try to do my best. Honestly, when I was putting this presentation together, I was struggling in terms of like the depth of it, and I'm gonna try to do my best to kind of like honor some of the topics we're gonna talk about best I can. I do want to acknowledge that I'm like able-bodied white Latinx person, and some of the conversations I'm going to be like doing, I can only go into so much depth without kind of really kind of speaking outside my context. And if I do mess up, I'm really open for critique and feedback. So please, like, feel free to just step in if you have questions. We do have a Q&A section. And thank y'all for joining. This is like a really presentation that I'm really like excited to kind of share with y'all. So I know the titles are slightly different, traces and growth, but what I wanted to do today was kind of basically talking about how growth is possible for trans and queer folks, particularly queer and trans youth. If folks are familiar with ACEs, a lot of this language is very familiar. And we're basically going to be focusing in on the protective factors that really support trans and queer youth, particularly through the context of like POC and Black Indigenous folks. Yeah, again, we're going to be focusing on kind of building cultural resilience and building care with one another. And to start, I kind of wanted to kind of read a poem from Langston Hughes. And please bear with me, I'm not the greatest poet or the greatest orator, but I'm going to try to read in order for us to kind of give the context of why it's important to kind of honor people's gender and their sexuality at a young age, as we kind of talk about the concept of adverse childhood experiences and how to improve health outcomes. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore, and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? So the reason why I shared this is like oftentimes when we talk about supporting youth, and we talk about kind of supporting particularly queer and trans youth. We often talk about kind of what are the deficits, what are the weaknesses, what is like the trauma. Oftentimes what we don't do is really kind of honor and create spaces for folks to kind of succeed, grow, and navigate and reimagine themselves. And what research has shown is if you actually support queer and trans youth by honoring things like pronouns, providing safe spaces, and giving them tools, they actually have better health outcome or as the same health outcomes as their cisgendered counterparts. Like when we talk about like health outcomes when it comes to the LGBTQ community, queer and trans youth, oftentimes we see the deficits, we see the heavy costs in terms of like folks experiencing higher rates of depression, like suicide, like really like worse health outcomes, kind of similar to if you folks are familiar with ACEs, higher ACE scores. And what researchers found is if you actually create some systems, which we're going to go over in a bit, you can actually support and alleviate some of those deficits and those senses of harm. So kind of giving some setting for our conversation today. So queer and trans youth live in a country, in a society that constantly reinforcing that their existence is wrong and being your authentic self with joy is wrong. This environment kind of creates barriers for social support and forces LGBTQ folks to create their own systems of care to prevent harm. Black, Indigenous, and disabled youth have added layers of violence and marginalizations they have to navigate. Now, those are daunting things. And I don't really want to have all this conversation be centering around trauma, but we need to kind of acknowledge that these are like the barriers in which queer trans youth are walking into and what their context is in school and as well as like at home and navigating their own communities. But this is real important so we can begin to find out what are some solutions and spaces of healing and growth for folks. So this is kind of like the standard kind of experience that folks have and kind of why you see the statistics in which LGBTQ youth and LGBTQ folks have worse health outcomes. LGBTQ youth experience stigma and shame growing up. That goes into toxic stress, and that kind of pushes them further and further into cycles of marginalization and violent outcomes. Think of it as like a very tragic, awful circle of violence, a positive feedback loop, if you will. But there's ways to kind of mitigate that, ways to kind of alleviate the toxic stress, ways to kind of minimize and fight back against marginalization and violent outcomes. So these are some protective factors. These are, for lack of a better word, like protective factors for trans and queer folks that really do improve health outcomes. One, having at least one supported LGBTQ adult. Statistics show that a vast majority of LGBTQ youth do not have like a role model, like that's a role model or adults that they get informed of in school. So that means they don't have historical figures, historical context in which they can see themselves as elders, as adults. So what really impacts folks is having an LGBTQ adult, a mentor, a history figure. This is why like there is a big push, and there is legislation that says that K through 12 schools should have LGBTQ history incorporated into their social studies classes, because these actually improve health outcomes by having kind of contextualizing that LGBTQ folks have always existed and they've contributed to society and they've done wonderful things. Another thing is kind of imagining LGBTQ futures and possibilities. Kind of goes hand in hand with like having adults and support and role models. Just being able to kind of imagine kind of what they can do, what the person can do when they get older, as they get old, is really impactful for folks. I'm not sure like how much in detail I can get into this, just given the time restraints, but like one of the most impactful things you can do for a young person, and this is like regardless of their gender or sexuality, is give them a future or like give them a dream that is substantial and tangible to them. They can feel that they can realize into. What happens with a lot of queer and trans youth is that society and their circumstances make like those dreams very hard and things hold up. Another factor that's really important is problem solving skills.
Sorry, Gustavo, I don't want to interrupt, but we're
For a lot of queer and
a
trans
little
youth,
bit.
a lot of their situation.
I am sorry, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and have him try to hop back on. Hello.
Hey, sorry about that.
No problem. I just
Yeah,
wanted to let you know, I think we're losing you.
Okay, all right, cool. I'm sorry about that. I will move to a different spot where like the Wi-Fi.
Okay, thank you so much. We understand, but we understand your circumstances, so that's
Gotcha.
all good. Thank you.
So it would be helpful if you tell me like what point that I started cutting off.
You were still going over the second point.
Okay.
So before you got to problem solving, you still were explaining your second point a little bit more.
Okay, yeah. So just kind of going back, finishing up imagining LGBTQ futures and possibilities. It's important that youth be able to kind of embody dreams that match their gender and sexuality, that they can have relationships as queer adults, that they can have jobs or they can have careers or build lives for themselves where they can be queer and trans, and themselves. Oftentimes, when you're growing up as a queer or trans youth, you feel like there's not much of a future for you. That society is not built for you, because it's like a lot of society is a marginalization of your very existence. So what really is impactful for folks is being able to imagine that they exist in the future, that they will be one day, they'll be a role model for someone. They will be able to kind of have a community, that they have possibilities. Second predictive factor, problem solving skills that think beyond heteronormativity. So when we talk about heteronormativity, this is a concept I'm probably going to be talking about different parts of today's talk. But that's basically that the norm is white, cisgendered, which means basically your gender matches your sex assigned at birth, and basically that you're heterosexual. These are like being able to kind of problem solve and kind of communicate beyond kind of that, if that's not your life and that's not your sexuality or gender, is really important. So you need to kind of have community spaces where you can think about how to have a life that's fully realized. And for a lot of queer and trans youth, it's a lot about the rights. It's a lot about kind of how do you deal with an administrator that you're in opposition with. How are you going to get past homophobic or transphobic adults? How are you going to be able to kind of like live your life beyond kind of like these like restrictions? Because to be frank, like a lot of a lot of youth go through trauma going through like the education system, and I think we're making strides, and there's a lot of allies, and there's a lot of education and a lot of deep learning happening. But oftentimes, folks, like a lot of LGBTQ spaces and a lot of corrective factors is basically how do you get recognized? How do you get society to recognize that you have rights and agency? Then this is kind of like a basic kind of community thing, being needed by others and needing others. Like there's like a vulnerability and survival mechanism that folks kind of develop if you're queer and trans youth, and that you become kind of self-reliant. You get kind of like are very defensive, and you kind of cut yourself off because because of family rejection, societal rejection, folks don't really have a lot of resources or a lot of community that they can depend on. So they begin to kind of be much more insular. If we look at protective factors at large, one of the major factors is being able to kind of have community and have community support. So one of the major things we try to like teach youth as well as work with youth and others is kind of building trust and building the sense of like it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to need others. So going back on like the first point, a lot of history in terms of going through K through 12 and growing up is you really don't see a lot of LGBTQ elders. So on the screen before us are James Baldwin, the playwrights, like the great like thinker, just kind of all around icon. I would say probably one of America's greatest writers of all time. He was a gay Black man born in poverty. He said he won the lottery essentially. And basically his works kind of examine kind of whiteness and kind of the experience of Black folks. in the country. And I think his works, as well as like his fiction work, also kind of examine kind of the duality of gender and sexuality within like the American project. And that's like, really powerful. I feel like, but I didn't, like personally, I didn't get to James Baldwin until college. And for a lot of Black and POC youth, that would be a very powerful reckoning if like you knew about James Baldwin like earlier on. Next on the screen is Michelle Roberts, or, an incredible trans icon. She basically is a pioneer in terms that she started a very influential like blog and basically reported about the life and affairs of trans folks that was pretty revolutionary. She's like probably one of the like founding mothers of trans journalism in like the 21st century. And then we have Bertrand Contreras, a famous queer environmentalist, and really kind of like her fingerprints are all over the modern day environmental movement. And someone like, I think if we're talking about kind of influential kind of civil rights and social justice leaders, is someone a lot of folks can like gain strength from. So kind of going back to kind of like the second point in terms of safe spaces, what like safe spaces are, and because I'm going to go into like, I think we do have some time for a little bit of a quick history. I'm going to probably have to kind of jump around a little bit, but the need for these safe spaces is like a place for folks to kind of break from code switching. Oftentimes when you're in classrooms or in family settings, you have to hide parts of yourself. So you have to kind of essentially compartmentalize. This is where the phrase being in the closet kind of comes from. You hide parts of yourself. Safe spaces like the youth support group that we run online is meant to kind of, for folks to have a reprieve from that. And these are spaces where folks don't feel isolated and feel connected with others. They're learning environments. These are places where folks can get resource referrals, both like informal and informal. Like it can be a conversation, like it can be just a conversation about like who's like a competent queer barber in town, or like how did you get like learn how to do your nails so well. Like these are like very big things that like will lead to gender affirming practices, as well as just feeling like connection. And also these are spots where folks have like developed youth leadership and community leadership. These pictures here are from our gender health conference that we were part of last year, pre-pandemic. It was one of like the first gender health conferences that focused in on, well, just like what I said, gender, and really kind of validated the gender variant and transgender community by focusing in on like how do we improve health and how do we improve like community. Like this is kind of like, I think this is kind of seems like very kind of like dry stuff, but for queer and trans folks, this is kind of revolutionary in terms of like spaces they can occupy. Because we're going to talk about like where folks had to kind of build their community, build their organizing. Oftentimes it's in like the margins of societies and bars and like clubhouses. These are like the fact that we are able to kind of operate in like the light and in community with one another at like this took place at UCR, which I'm again alma mater, really proud. But it does mark like that there is like a community that's stepping into itself. So this is, again, I'm gonna probably have to cut this more than I want to, even like when I was planning it. But this is a super short overview of 20th century and 21st century problem solving and forming communities. So basically, kind of the latter 2 points that we talked about in like the projective factor section. So can some I was going to ask like in the chat, Can anyone name me who is on the screen right now? Okay, so on the screen we have.
I can help you with the chat box if you want, Gustavo.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I was like, I'm just asking folks like if who on the like who is present on the screen. This is not the caller.
I do have a response. Benita shared Arsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera.
Yeah. Thank you, Benita. I think I know which Benita that is. Yeah, but this Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, two trans women that were like really kind of revolutionary and really speaks like it's kind of hard to kind of like articulate their importance to like myself and other queer and trans like organizers and people who hold space. They are like just essentially I don't want to kind of create them as mythical figures, but they were two trans women who devoted their lives to trans youth in New York. Like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera were present at Stonewall. There is kind of like this like mythical myth that Marsha was the one who threw like the first brick, but that's like history gets kind of like messy and conflated and doesn't seem to be true. But both Marsha and Sylvia like spent their whole lives being marginalized, but also constantly fighting for space and resources for trans folks, trans youth, and were like pioneers in like liberation organizations. And I think they like one of the principles that they kind of really are center in terms of these protective factors is living their life with joy. And this is a picture of them, I believe, either at the first Pride in 1970 or like subsequent like earlier Prides. Yeah, so I think Pride gets in terms of like Pride is the reason why I titled it 20th century is because I wanted to honor. So on like the far right, these are images from like the Coopertown donut shop in Los Angeles. There's actually before Stonewall, there's many like uprisings for queer and trans folks that kind of like step into their power and demand that they be treated with dignity and respect. And the Coopertown donut shop, the Cooper donut shop in Los Angeles is one instance here on like the right side. And then we have pictures of subsequent prides over the course of like the 70s and the 60s. And like what the reason why Pride is so impactful and very important for folks is it's like a space in which when we take youth to the Pride, it is a space for them to kind of be unadulteratedly in a space that is not heteronormative, that it is queer and trans affirming and actively trying to like create a society and space and movement for queer and trans folks that have respect and dignity. And that for youth is so like a wash of joy that it's really kind of hard to articulate, but essentially kind of picture your life when you were kind of a green crayon and you're kind of like forced to kind of live in a red crayon world. And then just kind of one day you take a turn in a corner and you see a whole village of thriving green crayons and you feel like, oh, this is possible. Like I don't like I'm no longer otherized. I feel connected with a community and like you feel a heartbeat. And that is like very powerful for folks. Pride is very complicated and messy, and we can go into whole like conversation about kind of like the state of Pride. But Pride, its history as it really is connected towards like Stonewall, and like the reason why Stonewall is kind of remembered the way it is because of like the actions and movements of that night galvanized folks to organize the first Pride and New York City Pride, and that has a history that kind of is transformed a lot of movements and spaces. And say what you will about Pride, it is influential and has basically created space for folks to kind of be in themselves and like take up space and feel affirmed in taking up space. The ballroom culture. I'm again. This is like a part where I'm gonna like. I I want to honor and articulate that. A lot of culture is because of Black trans women, and the ballroom culture um, is one of those things. A lot of Black queer and Black trans folks created basically kind of what I believe is like the heartbeat and rhythm of American culture, and the ballroom scene is a place where folks, if folks have time, next week we're going to be watching Paris is Burning, as like it is a it has its flaws, but it's a good documentary because it does give a window and space of late 80s, late 1980s New York and early 90s New York, in which um, in which Black, queer, and trans folks were like living and forming communities and forming houses and allowing like for gender affirming expression and forming these communities. And like as society kind of pushes them away, they're finding their own communities and building their own connections and living their like finding joy in a very hard life. And I think going back to history, um, like like the struggle for queer and trans folks is not like divorced, but is in conversation with Black liberation and like the struggles of the disabled community and like kind of reconciling with the country's history with like the genocide of its first peoples. And like a lot of queer trans figures like Audre Lorde recognize that. And a lot of their work has been dedicated to kind of unsettling and decolonizing and creating space for folks to kind of imagine and problem solve. And if we taught, I honestly do believe if folks were taught a little bit more Audre Lorde and less of um, um, like the histories of slave owners, or actually contextualizing like the contextualizing forefathers and as owning slaves in real ways. I think a lot of queer and trans folks would like get a lot of power from it. Um, and one of the phrases that are really kind of sticks with us is our feelings are the most genuine path to knowledge. And I think that is a statement that I carry in my work, and we hope that youth really like hold that space. And I think we're still under attack, and I think it's really important that like folks don't forget and don't minimize or forget the violence that folks experience or are vulnerable even as they approach adulthood. The Pulse shooting in 2016, it is a recent and painful example of, I don't know, just like the violence and the targeting of queer lives, queer, brown, Black bodies by a society that doesn't care for them and really targets and like attacks. So when we talk about creating spaces, it is a form of self-preservation and self-love, and it's not without risk, and it's not without history, and it's really important that we remember that history. Next week is Trans Day of Remembrance, and I hope folks take time to kind of do what they can to honor and grieve for the loss of trans life. Celebrate it. One of the going back to like kind of like a I'm trying to like hold space for this transition, but I think I'm struggling here. So I'm going to take a moment and kind of breathe, because I think yeah, I think things are tough and things are hard, and I think growth and movement happen in concert with one another, and it doesn't feel great all the time. But there's constant like movement towards creating space for one another and creating space for queer and trans voices. So I think right now, like on the screen, like there's pictures from like the first 1970 Pride, pictures from last year's Redlands Pride, pictures from a event we did with local community in San Bernardino called like Love is Love, where folks get to kind of have basically a Pride event in San Bernardino, which if you know San Bernardino, if you know the area, is very rare, and also kind of our modern kind of what we're doing to kind of get through quarantine, which is our Zoom LGBTQ source groups. And basically, these are all problem solving. These are communities kind of coming together in conversation in grassroots settings to find space with one another, can to connect and celebrate our lives, and think of like how we can exist in the future and take the struggles that we're going through and hold those struggles and find pieces of joy. And if we can do this, we can, like, for ourselves, like youth will see this and they can articulate that into their own lives and think and imagine in new directions as well. Like I feel like I've learned a lot about my organizing and work through both my elders and the folks that are younger with me. And like having these conversations between different spaces and different groups, this is kind of allows for imagining of futures and imagining of hope, which if we're talking about suicide prevention is major. These are some pictures from um, over us, like our group for the years. We've done hikes, we've done conferences, we've done like Loteria, Millennial Bingo, um, energy bars when we did the hike. Uh, oh, they cut off the jack-o'-lantern, but gender affirming kind of makeup workshops, cooking classes, trips to Pride, uh, like craft activities, hikes. Like these are all things that really impact and really kind of affirm folks. Again, this is like a flyer for our LGBTQ support group that meets on Wednesdays. Next week, we are going to be talking about Trans Day of Remembrance, as well as kind of airing Paris is Burning. If more information, like we'll definitely have time to kind of talk about that and go over it. But I also kind of want to like highlight that like the reason why I'm showing these as well is like these are kind of us kind of dealing with the circumstances of the pandemic. So we can't be in person, rightly so, because there's a virus going out. So we're trying to think of how we connect one another. So like we are meeting over Zoom, we are creating podcasts, and we're just not the only ones. Other organizations are finding ways to connect with one another. Another organization that we really like want to kind of promote and like kind of let you know exists is Brigo Health also has trans peer support groups that are like happening at the same time. So this is another example of resiliency, not just my organization, but other community organizations, as well as the Trans Lifeline. These are spaces like that are online and virtual, not in person. We can't be in person right now, but it just kind of shows you like us as a community kind of resiliently coming together to support one another and give community care. And these are portals that folks can kind of step into, and like these actually improve health outcomes. They improve like the likelihood of queer and trans youth reaching adulthood and like thriving, and not just kind of like maintaining, but thriving and surviving. These are other great, amazing resources in the area. The Gender Affirmation Project is a great resource for folks who are looking for like actual therapy and counseling. We don't do therapy, unfortunately, at this point, but like Gender Affirmation Project is a great resource for folks who are looking for clinical services. The Inland Empire Immigrant Youth Collective is a lovely queer and trans supporting space for immigrant youth, and we really recommend the work that they do. The Inland Prison Collective is another grassroots organization that has support groups for folks, as well as does a lot of LGBT activism, as well as API Equality LA that really focuses on the Asian Pacific Islander experience. Again, here's my contact information. Thank you all for bearing with technical difficulties and what I'm sure I mumbled at some point.
Thank you, Gustavo. I do want to let everybody know that I will share this presentation following the webinars so everyone can take advantage of those useful resources and links that you provided. That would be great to share with our attendees today. We're getting a lot of thank yous, but yeah, this is the time for any questions or comments that you may all have for our presenter today. And we can go ahead and open up the Q&A. I guess one of my questions, and you covered it, was during this time, how are we able to create, virtual safe spaces for LGBTQ plus youth? And you covered that with your resources, so your virtual support groups and then all of these other resources that you shared. So I think that's, I guess that was just lingering in my mind, because sometimes these safe spaces that you talked about in your presentation, it can be a safe space physically at their schools. Mm-hmm. And now that they're not there, what is the safe space for them, or who can be a safe space for them since they're at home?
Yeah, no, I think that is a good question. I think that's something that we are all always kind of trying to reconcile as a group, as a group, as an organization. Right now, we can't. One of the great benefits of schools is it's a space where you can physically go, and you still have to code switch to some degree, but you are able to have distance from home. And a lot of our youth don't necessarily have affirming homes. So what we've tried to do is try to figure out spaces and different things, either virtually via Instagram, via Zoom, but kind of similar kind of what you're doing right now. You're holding space and virtually, as well as kind of figure out what materially really helps folks. One of our executive director, Benita, had a lovely idea of basically providing care packages for folks. And that is something that speaking with youth has meant a lot. And getting cards and foods and just kind of being in contact with one another, that's been really impactful. Also, I think being able to check in with folks, being able to kind of send an email, see how you're doing, and check in with folks is really important at this time. Sometimes folks can't attend an hour-long support group or 2-hour-long support group, but they can come in and say hi real quickly, or they can reach you via an email or an instant message to kind of let you know how they're doing. Yeah.
I feel like it's just those little things, just checking in on them makes the biggest impact. So thank you. We're getting a lot of thank yous. Thank you so much for your presentation, Gustavo. And yeah, just definitely lots and lots of thank yous for that. So I'll still leave a couple of minutes. I think we do have one question. Oh, so we have a comment. And it's from, I'm sorry if I say this wrong, if it's Carmen or Carmine, but they noted your purpose is true and permeates the world. Most are blind. It is huge, and I feel your frustration at not being able to put it to words.
Thank you. Thank you for that support, and thank you for connecting in that way.
Thank you. And then we have a question from Melanie, but she just would like to know if the presentation will be available later. Yes, it will be available later. I will go ahead and provide that to everyone following the webinar. Thank you, everyone, for all the thank yous. We really appreciate it. I want to go ahead and I want to share my screen one last time for everybody.
Yeah, real quick. Sorry. If I can make one more thing announcement. Hey, if folks can actually fill out a survey, I think we'll be sending it later.
Yes.
It's going to be for our ourselves to kind of gauge the impact of the presentation. So please fill that when you get it from us. Thank you so much.
Yes, definitely. We have our short survey, and then Gustavo will also share a survey on behalf of their organization as well. So definitely fill that out for them. Thank you for sharing that, Gustavo. So I want to just go ahead and I just have some final thoughts in regards to our social media. Please feel free to follow us. Please feel free to follow Rainbow Pride Youth Alliance. They're very active on social media as well. I believe we shared it in the chat box. Sign up and subscribe for our YouTube channel so you can watch all of our recordings as we upload them. And remember, it's World Kindness Week. I've been saying this throughout this whole week, and tomorrow is World Kindness Day. So just please remember to spread a little kindness wherever you are at, even if you're just at home, do it online, at work. Just something so small can make the biggest impact in somebody's life. And you can always tag us. We want to share it. And these are just the final webinars that we have this week. We have 2 more tomorrow. And then all of our previous webinars have actually been uploaded on our YouTube channel, so you're able to watch them at your own convenience. So I want to go ahead and end the webinar there. I want to thank everyone for attending today, this afternoon, and I want to go ahead and thank Gustavo for sharing such useful information for us and taking the time out of your day to share this with us. So thank you so much. Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.